Welcome to the Six Hats podcast, where I, Dr. Shami, a lifestyle and nutritional medicine family doctor, will talk about how women strive to find balance each day by juggling their six roles, being a woman, mother, daughter, partner, business owner, and professional. Hello everyone, welcome to the Six Hats podcast. And today I have Fiona McKenzie join us. Now she's the founder of Resolving Matters, a Sydney-based consultancy firm. She's an accomplished management consultant with 20 years experience, and she brings skills and experience in commercial negotiation, facilitation, training, and mediation. Now she has consulted across a range of industries, including healthcare, financial services, and education, and has led a diverse range of projects, including merger and acquisition and implementation of strategic change. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Shami. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm sure my listeners are trying to wonder, why are we talking about negotiation? What's that even connected to health? So I'm going to start off with a story. I was reading a book, Daniel Pink's book, actually, and it's called To Sell is Human. And what struck me was that every day we're actually negotiating. And for example, at home, who's doing the home chores? Who's going to wash the dishes? Who's going to take charge of buying the car? And even how we have to encourage children to do their homework. We're constantly negotiating. So what we're going to talk about today actually applies to everyone. But as we all know, negotiating can be stressful. It can be a source of stress. And as Six Hats, it's all about how do we empower ourselves with knowledge and strategies to reduce stress. Hence why I invited you, Fiona.
Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right, Shami. We are negotiating all of the time, and it's something that I stress with all of my clients. It's a life skill.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, we're not actually taught this in school, in my higher education training, and it's something that we're always doing. So I can't wait to dive into this topic. But I love to start with your story. How did you end up with a business called Resolving Matters?
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, I am a management consultant by background, and I worked as a consultant for many years. But I realised in that process that the projects that I loved the most had a really big component of negotiation. And so I wanted to focus on that specifically. And along the way, I was certified as a mediator. So that's like a conjoined skill, I guess you could say. I've always known that I've had some talent in the field. I'm a middle child, that middle children are often the peacekeeper or the troublemaker, and I was a bit of both. And I was happy to take it to my siblings and also happy to try and smooth things over. I guess I call it my origin story. I have a memory from when I was about 8, playing on the beach with my younger sister, who would have been 3 at the time, and an older boy kept squashing our sandcastles, and I negotiated an outcome with him where he could play with us. And at the time, I was a little bit in awe of myself. How did I do that? So I've always been a little bit aware that there's something innate for me, and I just actually love it. So that's the sort of background how I ended up in the area. Broadly, my business Resolving Matters, I focus on 3 elements, so negotiation, mediation, and facilitation. Everything revolves around negotiation and conflict. I help leaders. I do training with government and business on negotiation. I help individual leaders or execs with coaching. One of my favourite jobs that I do is work with leadership teams where there's a lot of conflict, helping them to actually identify the source of that and find new ways of operating together. And I facilitate workshops with leadership teams, so to look at collaborative ways of working together. Interestingly, I'm actually thinking of moving away a little bit from the name Resolving Matters. I chose it because I thought it was a really clever pun. Matters need resolving, and resolving things really matters. But sometimes I think it sounds a little bit like I want to smooth things over. And I don't. I actually genuinely believe that sometimes we need more conflict. You've actually got to unearth things to make progress.
I love that. That's amazing. And so I can't wait to just dive in deeper about how does it all work? Because you're right. It starts off with conflict. We're coming with different perspectives, different opinions, different experiences. How do we get to a point where we both get what we want to a certain extent? Would that be right? Negotiation is about both parties gaining something from that conversation.
Yes, definitely. Negotiation is all about when you want something from the other person and they want something from you, and how you come to a conclusion where your needs are met. I'm a little bit anti the win-win sort of balance comes around negotiation. And if people say negotiation's about win-win, I always tell them I've got a second-hand car that I'd love to sell them because when you're buying a car or a house, you actually want to get the better deal. But in most of our negotiations, it is about, there is some compromise. Very few negotiations have a pure collaboration.
Right.
There are lots of different styles that we would bring to a negotiation depending on what we're looking for.
This would be a great segue to, what are your tips? Where do you start in terms of negotiation?
I think, as we've already discussed, we're negotiating all of the time. And I think that the best way to learn to negotiate is to actually practice with the little things. I call this the giggle vomit test. And so what you want to do is choose a few really low stakes things like an extra scoop of ice cream or an upgrade in a hotel, and then actually double that request if you can and go and ask for it, and then try not to giggle or blush or feel queasy in the tummy. So that's the giggle vomit test. But this is the important step. Afterwards, try and work out what your physiological reaction was to that, because good negotiators are really attuned to their physiological responses, and you want to try and train away. We don't want to hide emotions. That doesn't help, but we want to be able to manage them. We want to be able to manage our response. So the giggle vomit test actually just allows you to practice asking for weird and wonderful things so that you get used to that. It's kind of like a muscle that you want to put to the test. That's my first tip. I will tell you a story about the giggle vomit test. I haven't purchased mascara for, I think it's 13 years. So my giggle vomit test for me is when I go to the cosmetics counter is to always ask for some free samples. And the brand that I use always have the little travel size mascaras. And so I get one of those and I've got a big jar, and now my daughters share the jar and we haven't run out for a long time. So I just really encourage people to try that. I've helped clients practice more and more difficult micro negotiations to build up to important big ones. So that's my first tip.
I loved what you said. And so many stories are coming in my mind of how it's so easy not to ask, right? It's so easy to be in that comfort zone and having all sorts of stories in your mind, creating fear of not asking. And you're so right. We've got to start by even asking. And I'm thinking of so many scenarios where my listeners might resonate with, and they could be in situations where they're not happy in their job or they're not happy in this partnership. It could be also a relationship where they go, well, I'm doing things which I don't actually want to do, and I'm not doing things that I actually want to do. And coming from my perspective, that creates chronic stress.
Yeah.
And it's so insidious. And as my listeners know so well, this insidious chronic stress can grow and grow and grow to a tipping point of mental and physical health. And it just goes back to something as simple as practicing the art of asking. I love that.
Yeah, we really want to get to the point where a no doesn't hurt. So the extra scoop of ice cream, you get a no. The mascara, the whatever it might be, you get a no and it doesn't hurt. And that helps you be brave in the big moments when you are trying to reduce stress in your life with whatever it might be, a new job, a new car, sharing chores at home. So yes, practice. That's my first tip.
That's amazing. So moving on to...
Yeah, another tip really is that questions are the superpower in a negotiation. Obviously, you want to try and find out more about the other person, so you would use questions to do that. What I tend to find, I do some corporate environments, some negotiation assessment where I observe people negotiating and give them feedback. And so often what I see happening is people, while the other person's talking, they're thinking about what they're going to say next, instead of actually really listening. So use that question and then listen. Another way that questions help is if your emotions are getting a little bit beyond you, asking a question just actually gives you time to regroup, get your emotions under control, and you might find extra information. You can catch people out lying if you ask the right questions. I always counsel people, don't say you're lying to me. You just want to keep asking questions until they realize that you're onto them. And if they're not lying, you haven't embarrassed yourself.
Wow. You've mentioned another amazing point. It's listening. And, when you really reflect, how often do we listen? We're very quick to go go, oh my God, what am I going to say in response? And you're always thinking about what you're going to say rather than just sitting back, relaxing, taking some lovely deep breaths, and just listening to someone's story and learning as much as you can from this conversation. And in my role, this is literally what I do. Listening is just key to actually going on a journey with the patient. And how often we're so quick not to. I wonder if it's human nature, I'm not sure, but we might be in a state of like, oh, how am I going to respond? What am I going to say next? Rather than just sitting back and learning so much, being curious. I love that, just being curious about another person that you can learn so much about.
Yeah, definitely. Good negotiators are really curious. You have to really practice not thinking about what you'll say next to really get into that listening zone. Questions are the answer, really. Questions are the pathway to that. And there are lots of other ways you can use questions, quite like the humble brag question. So, have I told you about the work I'm doing with X client? Or have I told you about what great progress I made with this project at work? So there are lots of ways to use questions in a negotiation or in a conflict situation to deal with your emotions, to deal with the outcomes that you're looking for, and to sort of manage the situation with the other party. That's my second tip.
I just want to interject there because I know many people are actually fearful of speaking because they are so scared about, what they're about to say is of worth. And I always say to friends or family who say, oh, I'm really shy in these situations. I'm really shy in social situations. I go, all you need to do is just be curious and listen. People love talking about themselves.
Totally agree. If you can ask a good question, the other person is going to think you're the best person in the room. So
absolutely. I was like, moving on to, the third tip.
Yeah, so my third tip that I thought about for today is for people to understand, and this is negotiation terminology, but the difference between positions and interests. So positions are what we say we want. It's the solution, the job, the demand, the price, scope, terms, whatever it might be. Your interests are why you want it. So it's the underlying needs or aspirations or fears that are motivating you. And it's best illustrated with a story. So this is a story from a really famous, quite old now, book about negotiation called Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. And they tell the story of two sisters who are fighting over the last orange in the kitchen. And how sisters fight, I want it, it's mine, I want it, it's mine. And mum comes in, chops the orange in half and gives a half to each sister. One starts juicing it to have a drink, and the other starts taking the zest off to make an orange cake.
Oh, right.
So their positions were, one was, I want the orange. Both of them, their position, what they said they wanted was an orange, but their interests were different. One was thirsty, wanted orange juice. The other was hungry, wanted orange cake. Had they inquired with each other about why they were motivated to ask for that orange, they both could have got all of what they wanted.
Oh, wow. Something so simple.
It's so simple, and people get really stuck on positions in negotiations. It happens in family life. Who's going to get the kids from school? If people stop to ask why that's important to you, we end up negotiating much better solutions. And we end up reducing the conflict, but people get so gripped on their position of what they want without inquiring why. And you don't find the gems like that they both could have had all of what they wanted. I see it all the time. It's a classic negotiation and conflict mistake that's really easy to fix.
That's incredible because I can see that play out in everyday life in so many situations because we are constantly negotiating what we're doing, what others are doing, what we actually want. And wow, that's so simple, Fiona. That's incredible. What a great reminder.
Yeah, that's right. So, it's such a big field, negotiation and conflict, and I'm really so very passionate about it because I feel like it really changes lives. But some of the things to help people just start thinking about it, they're really quite simple. Ask better questions, try and understand why the other party wants something, and actually just practice. So they're really sort of those three really simple steps that I would recommend people thinking about.
It's almost like you can create a game out of it, like have fun and enjoy and sort of break the habit of fear of asking. I love that. But more importantly, is there anything that you've noticed in your career that women do differently from men when it comes to negotiation?
Yes, I have. There Unfortunately, sadly, even still, there are really deeply ingrained societal gender roles or stereotypes that make it hard for women to negotiate for what they want. Girls are still encouraged to be accommodating and caring and relationship oriented, and boys are encouraged to be competitive. And I think that makes it hard for women. I know some of this research is a little bit outdated, but I think it's still the case, showing that in some blind tests, men and women behaving in job interviews and in saying exactly the same things as each other, the women were judged more harshly if they were assertive compared to the men. And it's almost like there's a likability penalty sometimes with those stereotypes. It's terrible, but it's like women can be likable or competent, but they can't be both.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so I think things are changing. I think I've got 3 young adult children. They're 19 to 24. And I think I see my son and his friends, they're built different. And I think change happens of the way women are respected in society, but it's slow. It's a slow, long journey.
I can imagine, because stereotypical views just, imprinted, it's influenced from growing up to social media to what you see on TV. And it is ingrained, and it'll take years and years and years to really shift that. As a woman in a medical world, I've seen it. And I've experienced it in the last 20 years of what that seniority looks like, and how, I hate to say this, but male doctors, it's that subconscious bias, how they're treated differently by their male peers compared to women, and what we had to do to really go up that ladder, what we had to do in order to be seen and heard in that male-dominated areas of medicine. So, you're absolutely right. I think, let's not ignore the fact that there is subconscious bias going on. And how can we turn this around? This is what I love, turning things around, going, right, what can we do differently?
I wrote a white paper a few years ago, actually, about how negotiation skills might be a remedy for gender-based bias in medicine. And these days, there are more women entering medicine than there are men. And yet at the upper echelons, they're still mostly men. So what is happening in that transition? And I'm sure unconscious bias plays a big role. And it's the same with all forms of negotiation and conflict, I think, for women, that there is this likability penalty that is a challenge.
Yeah. So what could we do differently in sort of similar scenarios, or an example of a scenario?
So I really think that women need to learn assertiveness skills that help them ask for what they want without burning bridges. So the IP that I've developed is I call it courteous defiance. So it's how women can be really well-balanced negotiators and great at conflict management without sort of triggering that likability penalty in the other people. And so I teach a whole range of skills for that, about how women can be asking for things but ever so slightly tiptoeing around that likability. Even I think when people get nervous, they forget to smile. So I help with that. What I like to do is find out what triggers people have and then throw them at them, because then you get a little bit used to that. And so if somebody confided in me that they didn't want to be thought of as dumb or no integrity or something like that, well, I would throw them at them. So they build up their almost immunity to that perceived threat and have a response that they can deliver with courteous defiance.
That's incredible, because when I think about it, you might go into a meeting, for example, bank, asking for a loan or asking for a business loan, or going and asking for a job. And in your mind, from what you're in experience, you see the person across the table that could be quite intimidating for whatever reason, from the way they look, the way they carry themselves, and you create the story in your mind. And I always, when I really reflect back, because as a GP, I've seen all walks of life, all social classes, and they all come with the same problem in the sense of the human inside. And for me, it was a great time just to reflect, and it's like, they're just human. They're literally just human with all the same emotions that everyone will go through. We're actually all equal, but we've created this thing in society that whether you look a different way, you dress a certain way, what kind of car you drive, it creates this perception of superiority, which is actually just non-existent at all, because, you don't know what's behind that story of a lot of debt and a huge amount of stress and depression. And so I always think there's a story behind every person, and what you see in front of you may not be the truth. So it really makes you think, that superiority that you've created. I've been there, totally been there, or when I think of someone who's like, oh my God, I'm so scared to speak to them, and especially in my years of training as a doctor, they're just human. They're literally human behind that. What are your thoughts around that, Fiona?
I love that, Shami. I totally agree. I think we all, we've all got the little voice, the little person on the shoulder whispering in our ears. I tend to think women are a little worse at this, listening to that voice.
Oh, so true.
Yeah. And often I think in some situations, women will be blaming the other party when something's going wrong. Oh, she's horrible, or she hates me, or whatever. And sometimes we're blaming ourselves. I'm so stupid. What I do know is we never, ever would speak to someone else the way that we speak to ourselves. And the question at that point, and I see this all the time with conflict situations and negotiations, you've always got to step back and ask, what is really happening here? If I remove all of the emotion from this, what could that other person be thinking? What could their point of view be? What might really be happening? Almost like a rational assessor. What would a rational person think of this set of circumstances? And so we need to be thinking about those things all the time with conflict. If my husband's home late from work and I feel cranky because I'm home with little children, or I'm not anymore, but lots of women are, it's really easy to sort of jump on that, but he might have had a terrible day. It's almost like, I guess it's not jumping to conclusions first, and it's not listening to that nasty little voice in our head that wants us to blame other people or blame ourselves for something that's going wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to move to any success stories that you would love to share.
Oh, gosh. Look, I've had a lot. So I work one-on-one with in executive coaching on negotiation and conflict skills. So I've worked with a lot of professional women in lots of different industries. And so I've helped them in all different sorts of things. But the biggest pay rise that I've coached someone through was a 28% pay rise. So that's very significant.
Wow.
But I've helped, everybody wants that. That's a good number, isn't it? I've helped people work through promotions. I've helped women develop assertiveness skills. I had one client in the legal field, incredibly capable woman at work, but had never asked her family to make her a cup of tea. So it's one of those sort of traps that people can get in. So that's working one-on-one with people. I do a lot of work with government and industry, and I really love that work. I love seeing the changes in team dynamics. When I work with them around conflict, I like working with an executive team that aren't actually working together because they're not listening properly. And so to work through all that, to take a team that's in conflict and help them become a collaborating team is really, really important to me. I've helped with workplace disputes, and I've helped facilitate workshops for a whole lot of different sorts of organisations and community groups. So I've done a lot of
such a wide range, really, isn't there? When I think about it, wider. Ask the lady that you negotiated that 28% increase, what was holding her back? What were her barriers to not asking?
Her barriers were that she knew that she deserved a promotion and recognition for work that she was doing that was unpaid. And she felt confident in her professional field, but just didn't know how to start. And she had the little voice in her head telling her she wasn't worthy. And so I worked with her over about 3 months. And each week we worked on triggers. Each week we worked on that giggle vomit test. So she progressively asked for more and more things. And then we practiced the conversation over and over and over. I think saying things out loud, you get like a muscle memory that you don't have if you practice something in your head. So that's really important. And so we worked on that for quite a long time until she was able to ask for the meeting with her boss, explain her reasons, talk about her interests and the business interests and why actually there was common ground there. That's how she was able to negotiate that.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And what was really important in that story, it takes time. It takes time to build those strategies, those skill sets. It doesn't happen overnight. And that's what I'm hearing from your story. But it's so hopeful because I'm so, about empowering people, because I think we've got so much potential inside us. And those little voices are actually holding us back. And I always think, imagine a world where we're all living to our potential. What can we achieve and what can we do for humanity? That's going on a bit of a sidetrack, but I think it just starts with, really realizing your own potential and how we can almost unlock that. I love that.
I agree, Shami. And I think, especially in the negotiation field, if you have an individual woman that learns to negotiate and has better outcomes at home with sharing tasks and childcare and ability to return to work, is able to get promotions and pay rises, then that economic unit benefits. But then in workplaces, you get more women in more senior roles. And so then, you can't be what you can't see. So we know there's so much research around the economic benefits of diversity in organizations. And then when you kind of take that out to a societal level, you start to, if you have enough individuals and enough organisations where women are negotiating for what they're worth, then you deal with gender pay gaps and you deal with more kind of more broad societal issues. Like, I'm so passionate about this. I think we should all be learning this because we could actually change society with these skills.
Absolutely. Oh, we could chat for so long, Fiona, but I'm going to have to sort of ask my final question is, how can people find you? How can they work with you?
I have a website, resolvingmatters.com.au. I tend to not focus on that too much. I do have a newsletter. I would love it if any of your readers want to subscribe to that. So I write, it's only short, it's about a 2-minute read, 300 or 400 words around conflict and negotiation. I write every week and a half or so and give practical tips on my views on current affairs and things like that, all in the same space, negotiation and conflict. I'm also on LinkedIn if anybody wants to find me. So I can share those links with you, Shami, to share with your listeners.
Fantastic. So if they go to the website, Resolving Matters, they can subscribe to your newsletter. Yeah, amazing. I think I'm going to do that. Absolutely. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Fiona. It's so inspiring. And I think it's going to motivate so many of us to start adopting those tips and start learning this new skill. I love it.
Well, my pleasure. I hope I've inspired a few people to look into negotiation skills because there are a few skills that actually can have as much benefit and impact.
Amazing. Remember that this is general advice only. Please see your healthcare professional for more information. So what's your take-home message today? Remember, it's all about progress and not perfection. And are you suffering from stress? Visit the Usawa Learning Hub on usawa.com.au for more resources on how to de-stress, re-energize, and reclaim your health. Enjoy the journey.